تبعهم بإحسان إلى يوم الدين. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. سبحانك لا فهم لنا إلا ما فهمتنا إنك أنت الجواد الكريم. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي وأفوض أمري إلى الله إن الله بصير بالعباد. اللهم صل صلاة كاملة وسلم سلاما تاما على سيدنا محمد الذي تنحل به العقد وتنفرج به الكرب وتقضى به الحوائج وتنال به الرغائب وحسن الخواتم ويستسقى الغمام بوجهه الكريم وعلى آله وصحبه في كل لمحة ونفس بعدد كل معلوم لك. اللهم إنا نسألك الهدى والتقى والعفاف والغنى. اللهم إنا نسألك عفو والعافية والمعافاة الدائمة في الدين والدنيا والآخرة. توفنا مسلما والحقنا بالصالحين. اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا وقلبا خاشعا ولسانا ذاكرا وشاكرا وتوبة نصوحا. اللهم إنا نعوذ بك من علم لا ينفع وقلب لا يخشع ودعاء لا يسمع وعمل لا يرفع ونفس لا تشبع. رب زدني علما وفهما والحقنا بالصالحين. اللهم احشرنا في زمرة الصالحين يا حي يا قيوم يا ذا الجلال والإكرام برحمتك أستغيث لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. أما بعد. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته. My respected brothers and very respected sisters and all those who are watching us, welcome to Sunday evening fiqh class where we learn the essential personal Islamic knowledge. This is the operational knowledge, this is a technical knowledge that every Muslim who reaches the age of puberty, who becomes a mukallaf, must know. Compulsory for them to know. And inshallah ta'ala, once we finish our course, you would realize that majority of the things you already know. This is especially suitable for those people who missed out on that basic, fundamental, fardu ayn, compulsory Islamic knowledge. This is something that it is so essential that you cannot live Islam without them. Having a good heart is one thing, but not knowing how to pray, not knowing how to make wudu, not knowing how to give zakat, not knowing the rules of hajj, not knowing the rules of fasting, not knowing the rules of salat will render your iman very, very weak. So this is a very essential course for everybody. Unfortunately, we had some technical issues with our streaming. We need to change some of our equipment, which we did. It is not 100% yet, but we are there almost, inshallah ta'ala. We're waiting for a couple more items. And as long as the coronavirus continues and we're still at home, from our homes, inshallah ta'ala, from the comforts of our homes, we will continue to learn, inshallah. This particular course is based on Hanafi school of thought. Every now and then, when I give certain rules, I will also make mention of other schools and certain differences in those rulings. But for the time being, by and large, when we talk, this is Hanafi, inshallah, for those who wish to know. We have already done Kitabul Iman, the first chapter of every fiqh book that you see. It'll be a summary version of the creed of Muslims, what they must believe. And this is the second book, Kitab, or the book of purification, physical purification. And inshallah, once we finish this, we will continue on to Salat, Kitabul Salat, then Kitabul Zakat, Kitabul Fasting, Kitabul Hajj, Kitabul Janaiz, and etc. A few more until we cover enough. Inshallah, this will probably last several months. Allah knows best. Let's start. I've been preparing this particular text for a few years, and maybe 8 years. Inshallah, this will be also using the book that we are preparing as the base, which is a culmination of perhaps several decades of experience in this country in particular, and it is suited for the young people in particular. And inshallah ta'ala, if you see anything that is unusual to you, please do not hesitate to send a text message to me or send it through the Islamic Society, Coburg Islamic Center. They will get to me, inshallah ta'ala, and we will try to answer your questions in this regard. Now, inshallah, bi'idhnillah ta'ala, let's go back to the place where we just left off last time, several weeks back, and inshallah, see what happens. See what happens. Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. And as I told you, I'll be presenting to you notes at the same time. So if you were to take notes, write it with your own hands. Inshallah, you will benefit a lot. The big book of purification, inshallah ta'ala, we went through the virtues of cleanliness, what it means in our religion, some of the ayat and the hadith in this regards. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves those who are pure and purify themselves. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves those who are oft repenting, the ones who spiritually cleanse themselves from sins, and He loves those who are oft purifying of themselves. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the ayah in the Quran that Allah is the one who sent down water from the heavens upon you, from sky upon you, that thereby He might purify you. In other words, water is actually a purifying agent, a main purifying agent in Islam. And actually, if you look at the ayah on top, right, the blue, the white on the blue background, it is the same ayah we just read. وَجَعَلْنَا مَاءً, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, we have made the water for cleaning purpose, inshallah ta'ala, to purify you. Again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, purify your clothing. Why? If you are impure in your clothing, you can't approach prayer. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also says to us, Allah does not intend to make difficulty for you, but He intends to purify you and complete His favor upon you, that you may be grateful. The word tahir, yutahhirakum, it's Allah wants to purify you, is also mentioned in this ayah. And Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, at-tuhuru shatrul iman, for verily purity is half of iman, half of faith. Now, let's have a look at more technical, besides the virtues of cleanliness, that Islam gives a very high status to those who engage in this particular ibadah. Tahara is the word, purification. I will be using a lot of technical terms, not to scare you off. This is not my intention whatsoever. But every science, every area of study has its own unique set of claimantship, its own unique set of terms, technical terms. There is the dictionary, the meaning of that particular term, that word in the language that it belongs to, but its usage in certain area or field of study changes its meaning. So you can't study computers without megabytes and gigabytes and, internet without links and URLs and you name it. Everything's a technical term. If you never heard of them, yes, the first time it might be strange to you. But if you keep on repeating the same thing, you will understand. Every Muslim on the face of this world since childhood, if they are brought up in a Muslim family, they will know the word tahara, cleanliness, tahir, cleanliness. We give our daughters the name Tahira or Tahira, or we give the name to our sons. Tahir means pure. The opposite of Tahir is najis, filth. That's najis, don't get touch. Najis means filthy, impure. So you cannot learn any subject without knowing the terminology. Therefore, I will be introducing one by one, slowly, not the whole thing in one go, so that you write down, if you never heard of the word before, you write down, because I will use the English version of it, or English near meaning to it, but you must learn the actual technical terms in order to advance in this particular topic, or any other topic for that matter. Purification, in other words, tahara, means in Islam purification of the body, our clothing, our home, our space that we live in, also of our heart. This is commanded by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the sacred law, in the Sharia, and it is a compulsory duty upon every Muslim. It is impossible for a Muslim to be impure. Muslim always strives to be pure. Inna Allah yuhibbu at-tawwabin wa yuhibbu al-mutatahhirin. Allah emphasizes this. Verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves those people who purify themselves through the process of repentance and also purify themselves physically. Literally, purification means cleanliness. Tahara means cleanliness. But in the context of our deen, in our fiqh, in our jurisprudence, in the Sharia, tahara is performing that which renders salat, our prayer, and some other acts of ibadat, worship, permissible, lawful to perform. Tahara is the process of lifting what is opposite of tahara, called hadath, or removing najasa, physical impurity. You cleanse yourself from it, so you become eligible to perform certain ibadat. Therefore, a Muslim, every Muslim that is, male and female, must be outwardly pure and clean, in addition to having inwardly clean in terms of our beliefs, in terms of the attributes of our heart, cleanliness of our heart. It is a continuous struggle in our lives. Tahara, cleanliness, is a prerequisite, absolutely, for salat and many other forms of worship, we already said. And tahara is an act of worship. Tahara, cleanliness, purification, to purify ourselves, is an act of worship in Islam, and it is most rewarding. In our fiqh, in the Sharia, in our religion, tahara is essentially of two kinds. First, tahara from hadath. Tahara from hadath, meaning this is the legal impurity relating to three types of other ritual ibadat, namely wudu, ghusl, and tayammum. Also when it comes to touching Quran, of course, physical touching when you're reading the Quran, and certain other acts of worship, but mainly as far as we're concerned, wudu, ghusl and tayammum. If you are in a state of hadith, that means you haven't got wudu. And you're not if you're in a state of hadith, depending on what type, you don't have ghusl. I will come back to these terms and explain to you thoroughly, so don't panic. And if you don't have access to water and you need to pray, and what do? You can make tayammum, wudu with water if you like, waterless wudu, through using a soil, and inshallah ta'ala. This form of tahara hadath is called legal impurity. There is nothing physical. There is nothing touchable. There is nothing that is quantifiable. It is illegal, a condition that puts you into that situation. But there is another form of tahara. Tahara from najasa. All forms of material, visible, smell, impurity that you can actually physically touch and feel. The first tahara is called legal impurity. It's called tahara al-hukmiyya, according to Sharia. Sharia deems this to be legal impurity. The second type of impurity, or the cleanliness from it, all forms of material impurity in the Sharia is known as tahara al-haqiqiyya, the true physical impurity, quantifiable, solid impurity that you can see it, or liquid impurity. Therefore it becomes wajib for a person, compulsory for a person, necessary absolutely for a person to know what constitutes impurity, najasa in Islam. Oh, I didn't know that was najas. No. There are certain things you need to know. And the actions necessary to remove this najasa from yourself or from your environment, if it's an impediment for your ibadah, you need to remove it, so that you can go into the state of purity rather than staying in the state of impurity. The physical impurity, you can see the substance that actually has different categories, as well as the first category that we mentioned, the legal impurity, has also categories. Let's look at najasa hukmi, or najasa hukmiya, hadath hukmiya that we mentioned before, the legal ritual impurity. This particular impurity comes into existence if you have done an act that the Sharia sees it as you haven't done something that the Sharia views it as causing one to become impure. Impure in the legal sense. All the things, for example, that nullify your wudu, or ghusl, or tayammum, these are the conditions in the Sharia that will render you impure. This means that the impure state is brought by conditions rather than actual physical impurity being on one's person. This najasa hukmi, or the legal impurity, is further categorized as follows. It could be either hadath asghar, minor impurity, or hadath akbar, major, ritual impurity. So you can understand hadath being, the word hadath being impurity. Asghar means saghir, small, minor. And the hadath, again, in the second item, being impurity, but it is akbar. It is great, major, ritual impurity. If you are in a state of hadath asghar, minor ritual impurity, for example, if you have passed wind, you went to toilet, you broke your wudu, you're no longer tahir, you're no longer pure to approach salat. You cannot do your salat. If you did something that we will inshallah look at those items shortly, that rendered your clean, pure state into janaba, that requires you to do ghusl, then you are in a state of hadath akbar, major impurity. If you are in a state of janaba, in other words, for being in a state of hadath akbar, major ritual impurity, it automatically nullifies your wudu also, tayammum also. So you need to come out of that state by doing certain things. How do you go into that state? We will explain. How to come out of that state? We will explain. How to get into those in a state of minor ritual impurity, hadath asghar, and how to clarify so that you can go into state of purity, we will also inshallah explain shortly. A person is in a state of hadath asghar, minor ritual impurity, when one does anything to invalidate one's ablution, wudu, or does not have wudu in the first place. One is in a state of hadath akbar, major ritual impurity, when one does anything to invalidate one's ghusl. That requires you to take full shower in a particular manner. Or a person is menstruating. A lady goes through a monthly cycle, and in a menstrual cycle, she is said that she is in a state of that major impurity, legal impurity. A person who is menstruating is called ha'ilt. Or experiencing, again in the case of a mother, post-child bleeding, nifas it is called, or janaba after having halal intercourse, intimacy with your spouse, so to speak, or as a young person, men and women, doesn't matter, you found yourself that you had a wet dream and there are some stains of semen in your undergarments in the morning. So this will put you into hadath akbar state, but if you did something to break or nullify your wudu, you are in a state of hadath asghar. Therefore, as a result, a person in a state of major impurity is automatically also in a state of minor impurity. But once you come out of this state of major impurity through ghusl, you're automatically in a state of tahara. You don't need to make wudu again on top of your ghusl. The reason for this, that the actions which render ghusl void also subsequently render wudu void. That was hadath asghar, minor impurity. Now look at actual physical, actual impurity, how Islam looks at it. This is an area that many people do not know. Many people know that they need to make wudu and ghusl, yeah, they've been taught at a younger age, but many people are not educated in this area. Najasa haqiqi, or actual impurity. This is any substance with certain vulgar attributes, characteristics, which Sharia deems impure, such as urine, najis, filth. There are many. I will give examples shortly. This najasa hukmi, that actual impurity, is also further divided into two categories. The first one is called najasa khafifa, and second one is called najasa ghalidha. Najasa khafifa means light impurity, light physical impurity, substance. The second one is najasa ghalidha, gross, heavy, disgusting impurity. If you look at the terminology, when we talked about the legal impurity, we use the word hadath, hadath asghar, hadath akbar. But when it comes to real impurity, we use the actual word najasa, filth, impurity. Najasa khafifa, khafif, light, and the other one is najasa ghalidha, heavy. Yes, gross impurity. Let's look at najasa khafifa. All of the following items that we are going to look at just shortly, are impure, regarded as najasa. In general definition, they are najis. Najasa is the noun. The degree they are called either khafifa or ghalidha, light or heavy. Now let's look at what Islam sees as najis but khafifa, light impurity, physical impurity. First, the urine of animals whose flesh is halal. Example, sheep, cattle, yeah? Because they live with us all the time. Islam is a natural religion. You live in the villages, you live in the country, you have access to these animals, you benefit from them, so it's impossible to avoid. Therefore, Islam looks at the animals that we eat, the cattle, the sheep, yeah, that when they urinate, when we are milking them, or they are next to us, they splash onto us, yes, it is najis, but it is regarded as najasa khafifa. The urine of horses. Horses were a major medium of transportation just recently. Now we're driving cars, we don't have horses, but still people use horses. Majority of the people live in the rural areas, not in the cities. And in the third world countries, this is the reality of life. Horses, donkeys, you have all of those. So the urine of horses is also regarded as najasa khafifa. The droppings of birds, yeah, sometimes they drop onto your cars. You get upset, you just cleanse your car, you wash the car, and all of a sudden there's a huge. These birds don't have any manners. What can you do? That's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created them. So the droppings of birds whose flesh is haram. What do you mean? Example, eagles, falcons, vultures. Yeah. Imagine that you're living in a rural area. These birds are nested nearby and they fly over and you name it. They're droppings, regarded as najasa khafifa. Droppings of birds whose flesh is halal. It was the urine of animals whose flesh was halal. Now the droppings of birds whose flesh is halal. if the droppings give off an offensive odor. Yeah? What are we looking at? We are looking at ducks, chickens. The droppings of birds whose flesh is halal, with the exception of chickens and ducks, whose droppings give off an offensive odor, are legally pure. So if the chicken drops, the chickens have droppings, yeah, ducks have droppings, just wash it. It is not regarded as pure najis. Yeah. Let's look at more personal, that's applying to our persons. If a quarter or more of a part of a garment or a cloth that you're wearing is covered with najasa khafifa, then it is wajib to wash it. A quarter or a more of the garment that you are wearing. We will define this in a minute, just take it easy. Salat will not be valid if a quarter or a more of a part is covered with this type of impurity, najasa khafifa. You cannot do salat with it. You need to wash it. But if it's less than a quarter and you don't have access to water, you don't have time to wash because the salat is really passing, the waqt is passing, you need to do your salat, you can do your salat with it, although it is makruh to do so. If less than a quarter is covered, then salat will be valid. Not ideal, but valid, although washing the impure part is the best. Now, by quarter of the garment, yeah, a quarter of the particular garment, we mean that that particular quarter of that whole garment or whole body. A quarter of a sleeve, a quarter of a back, a quarter of an arm. Okay, certain things just dropped here. A quarter of my sleeve here. Yes, arm, a quarter, this much. It's dirty. But if it's more than that, it's not the whole garment, just a quarter. If it's at the back, something dropped on my back, some liquid or something happened, again, najasa khafifa business. Or, for example, the urine of the horse and your clothing was nearby and you had to wear it. And then you look at the contents of it, how big did that urine touched that particular garment. If it's more than a quarter of that particular area, the back, the arm, the sleeve, whatever the case is, if it's more than a quarter, you need to wash. You cannot pray with it. But if it's less than a quarter, yes, it is valid, but it's not the ideal. It's always preferable to wash it. We're talking about in a country setting where there is lack of water. Otherwise, in this city setting, there is the washing machine, there is a tub, there is the soap, you go and wash it. You don't say, oh, I heard the sheikh saying that I can do this, no problem. No, that's not. We're talking about the minimum, the threshold, where under certain circumstances, you, instead of not praying, you can pray in these clothes, which has less than a quarter of that particular limb or a particular sleeve, arm section of your clothing is soiled with najasa khafifa. If najasa khafifa falls into water or any liquid, could be milk, then that liquid too becomes najasa khafifa. And there are rules and regulations. When you're, for example, when you're milking from the udder of the cow or the ewe, and some droppings of the chicken or some urine splashed into the milk, what do? You chuck the whole bucket, 2 kilos, 3 kilos, 5 liters? No, there are rules and regulations, which we may cover, we may not cover. But inshallah, we'll see what happens. Najasa ghalidha. We looked at khafifa, now let us look at the gross, heavy impurity. The following are najasa ghalidha, gross impurity. This is something that really we need to be very careful of. All human and baby urine is regarded as najasa ghalidha. You need to wash. The urine of a donkey or other animals whose flesh is haram, it's all najasa ghalidha. The excrement of humans, what comes from the hind part, feces, or any four-legged beasts. In the case of cows, the green stuff, it's all regarded as najasa ghalidha. The blood of all animals and human beings, excluding the blood of fish and insects. The blood of all animals, agreed upon. But human beings, there is a difference between Hanafi and Shafi school. And Hanafis regard, as soon as blood within you is tahir, the moment it comes out, that oozes out, is regarded as najis, impure. But the Shafi school differs in this regard with their own dalils, which we also respect, not a problem. Any form of wine or any other liquid intoxicants is regarded as absolutely najis in Islam. There is a saying of Imam Ali karramallahu wajhah, radiallahu anh, which is not a Sharia ruling, but just to emphasize this point, after wine, khamr, intoxicants made haram in Islam, when the ayah came and it was prohibited, rijsum min amali shaitan ijtanibuhu, keep away from them, it is the acts of shaitan that teaches you. Yeah, Muslims left alcohol, no problem. For months on end, the streets of Medina and Medina stunk with wine that the Arabs used to take so much pride in, for having 200, 300-year-old wines. Really, the heavy stuff. But once it became haram, it was all emptied on the streets. Down the gurgler, gone. Imam Ali karramallahu wajhah says, Wallahi, if my little pinky were to touch a najis like that, as in referring to wine, alcohol, yes, the one that people drink, he says, Allah, Wallahi, I will not hesitate to cut it off from my finger. In Sharia, there is no rule, huh? If your hands touches accidentally, there some alcohol, some wine, you don't cut your finger or anything as such. But he is emphasizing the importance of keeping away from this particular haram, and also its status as being najis, filth. Another form of najasa ghalidha is the flesh of dead animals. Whether they die naturally in their own den, or they fell into a river, or they fell from a cliff, yeah? Or they are not slaughtered according to the Sharia. Yes, if, in this regard, if an inedible animal, such as a lion, a leopard, human beings used to hunt them not for their meat, but for their skin, their hide. And as soon as they were hunted, it is slaughtered, and they did not, Bismillah, Allahu Akbar, no. They're skinned properly from their hunt. The skin itself, after going through the process of cleansing, becomes halal to use. Halal to use. But if they are dead on their own, they're gone, days passed, you cannot even use the skin of that animal. The meat of an inedible animal is not purified in any way. Once it's dead, it's dead. You cannot just go and eat a carrion. Haram to do so. Carrion is a dead animal. Yes, they are halal animals, we can slaughter them, we can eat them, but it's too late, they're dead on their own. Even if it's an animal that is generally halal to eat, like chicken, which has flowing blood, it is untanned hide, for example, of the animal that we just mentioned. It is also, if they died on their own, you cannot eat it. The milk of animals whose flesh is haram. Oh, I want to have a leopard's milk. It's so exotic. I heard that it is such and such. It gives you such and such powers, some magical powers. This is utter nonsense and is absolutely haram. It is regarded as najis. It's halal for the baby of that animal, but for human beings, the actual milk of the animals whose flesh, his meat is haram to eat, it's also impure, najasa ghalidha. The sweat and saliva of animals, whose leftover food is considered impure, like pigs, elephants, and ferocious four-legged animals whose flesh is haram, except for cats whose leftovers are makruh to eat. So their sweat and saliva is also najis. So if you go to overseas, Malaysia, or some maybe Thailand or Indonesia, they say, come on, let's go for an elephant ride. According to the Sharia, the skin of the elephant itself is regarded as impure, najis. Or you jumped on the elephant and you had a good ride and came back, you enjoyed it so much, let's do salat, brothers, Allahu Akbar. No salat, because you're praying with najis. The cats, their leftover is regarded as makruh. It's not haram. Cat is a special category. Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam says quite a few hadith on the cats. There's actually a chapter on our fiqh books about the cats. The dogs are different. It is also najasa ghalidha. Everything, the bones, the hair, the skin, the meat, or any byproduct of the pig. We don't have anything against pigs because Allah made it haram. It's haram. لِعَيْنِهِ haram. Certain things are لِغَيْرِهِ haram. Certain halal things, for example, venison, a deer, that if you were to hunt it for the purpose of consuming its meat, halal, yes, it's halal. But if you find a dead venison, or it's been dead for a couple of days, a couple of hours, it's already swollen a little bit, it was halal if it was hunted by you. But now because of death, naturally occurring death or otherwise, لِغَيْرِهِ, because of another reason, that animal became haram to you. Its flesh became haram to you. But pig itself is لِعَيْنِهِ haram. Because of its being, Allah says in the Quran that the flesh, everything about the pig itself is haram. Its skin, its bones, its other stuff that inside they take to use in food production, the fat, the lard, whatever it is absolutely haram. Kullun, everything, just pure najis. So you need to keep away from it. Number 10. It is najasa ghalidha, heavy impurity. those things which come out from the human body, which nullifies wudu, such as blood. In Hanafi school, if a little bit of blood comes out, that is enough to paint your nail. Yeah, a little bit of blood. That renders your wudu nullified, void. But if it's a little bit tiny, miny blood that comes out, but it does not break its borders, yeah, and it just dries up there, that's fine. In Shafi school, the blood has to be flowing. A good amount has to flow so that your wudu can be regarded as broken, void. So in Hanafi school, this is a serious issue. Any form of blood from anywhere. So if you squeeze that pimple, the blood comes out, your wudu is gone. And if you are taking your sugar levels and you're prickling your finger and the blood comes out to test your sugar, that also breaks your wudu. If you're strictly Hanafi. If you're in that condition that you need to test your blood on a regular basis, go and speak to the mufti, get a special fatwa that they might give you something of Shafi school that you stick to it. So you don't have to make wudu at all times. You go and ask the mufti, the imam, the sheikh. He will probably give you a fatwa. He says you're exempt in this one, then you can take the Shafi ruling in this regard. But if you're just a healthy, normal Hanafi person, that you're following the Hanafi school in fiqh, then blood, any form of blood that comes out, after a certain amount, little amount, nullifies your wudu. Many is the semen that comes in a state of excitement, that is ejaculated from your private part, male organ, so to speak. In the Hanafi school, this is regarded as najas. When you wake up, there are certain parts of your undergarments are all stained. You need to wash it. If it's dry, you need to take it out. You need to rub it together, the cloth, so that you have to remove, because it's a sticky substance like a chewing gum, perhaps. It comes out. But in the Shafi school, mani is regarded as tahir, as pure. So it is not najas. So one of the differences in our school. Wadi is the thick white fluid that is emitted after urinating or lifting something heavy. That happens in the males in particular. The emission of either does not call for performance of ghusl. It does not make you a junub in a state of janaba, but it requires you to renew your wudu. Renew your wudu. I mean, sometimes when you go to the toilet, after urine it comes out, the thick substance that you can feel it. Or when you lift something heavy, you didn't go to the toilet, but you can feel there's some wetness, and you touch, and you find out that there is that particular substance, wadi, then you need to renew your wudu to do your salat. The vaginal fluid, it's a white discharge occurring in the period of purity between menstruations. Muftabih, or the fatwa of the Hanafi school, the accepted overall fatwa, the verdict in the Hanafi school, in the position of the Imam Azam Abu Hanifa, that is pure. Even though it breaks your wudu, if you feel such wetness coming through, and it's better to make freshen up your wudu. You don't have to go and make ghusl. The blood of istihada, haid and nifas, pus and vomit, whether it's a baby vomit or adult vomit, is regarded as najis. It must be washed. You cannot pray with it. Pus, any form of pus, abscess that comes out, is regarded as najis also. The blood of istihada is the chronic bleeding that happens, a discharge that will come out from the female organ, which exceeds the legal duration. It's regarded as istihada. Meaning, inshallah, if we understand the next one, it'll become clear. Hayd is the menstruation blood that is usually discharged from the uterus of a woman every month. So the unused egg, unfertilized egg, has to come out. So the ovaries will bring another egg out ready to be fertilized, so that human beings, so the lady becomes impregnated and becomes pregnant, so to speak, and produce a human child. If that doesn't happen, automatically body discharges that particular egg through bleeding, and it's called menstrual bleeding, hayd in Islam. It goes on for several days. The minimum menstrual bleeding cycle is 3 days. Anything less than 3 days is different. And the maximum is 10 nights. Anything goes above 10 days in Hanafi school, or anything less than 3 days, is regarded as istihada blood, a chronic bleeding, not necessarily a part of the menstrual cycle. There could be some other issues relating to this. Not necessarily the egg is being discharged, unused egg. So this person needs to see a medical doctor and get some treatment. I'm sure there is some treatment. But some people, they have 10 days, and some people normally about 7 to 5 days, and some, in rare cases like the 10, they might have 3 days of hayd. So anything that exceeds the 10 days or less than 3 days is regarded as istihada. And there is nifas, another form of bleeding that usually happens, postpartum bleeding or postnatal bleeding, or lochia, sometimes they call it, or lochia, depending how you pronounce it, is the blood that exists following the childbirth. Some women don't have any, but the duration, the minimum duration of nifas, there is no limit. But the maximum time is 40 days. Anything above 40 days of bleeding could be a medical problem, could be another issue, and that person is in a state of istihada, in a state of chronic bleeding. Why do I say this, and why these are numbers so rigid, so set? Because a person cannot stop praying their salat, or fasting for that matter, unless they are in these preconditions. A menstruating woman, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, I have taken that responsibility away from your shoulders. You're on holidays. Because it's such a change, hormonal change, the mood change within you. I don't want to put any pressure onto you to do salat. I let go my requirement of you praying salat in those days. 7 days, 5 days, 10 days, maximum. But after 10 days, you need to, as if you are 100% clean, you need to make a ghusl and start doing your salat. If you do it one extra day, 11 days, 12 days, those 2 days you missed on salat, because there is no excuse for not doing salat. And after your they're giving birth, that bleeding continues, maybe for 6 months, and you don't pray, that's not on. Maximum is 40 days. After 40 days, you need to continue doing your salat. This is for females. Inshallah, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for us. We have covered so far the types of najasa. We said what is tahara and what is hadath asghar, hadath akbar, and najasa khafifa and najasa ghalidha. And we looked at some of the conditions. Inshallah, perhaps we do this particular page and we will continue with our class next week from page 16 onwards, inshallah ta'ala. What is the excusable amount of gross impurity? Remember in najasa khafifa, the urine of a horse perhaps, we said a quarter of a garment's section. This is a bit more technical detail. A spot of ghalidha, impurity, the size of a dirham. Have you ever seen a dirham? I've never seen one before. But in every single fiqh book, they will use this size as a measure. Dirham. Or if you've never seen a dirham, never seen a dirham before, ulama, they say the size, the inner part of your palm. Like here. Inner part of your palm. Not the whole palm, but inner side, just the inner part. Yeah? Inner part of your hand. Approximately the size of perhaps 50% coin of Australian coin. But if you live in a different country, forget about 50% coin. You just look at the inner hand, this palm here in your palm. Human palm, not anything else. When the ghalidha impurity is thin, it spreads out like urine, or the weight of 3.5 grams, I don't know how you're going to measure it, then it is solid, thick, you are excusable. Or you may pray in a garment. In other words, you have some marks under your garment, something came out, and you look at it, if it's a urine, and you have no access to water, there's no way of changing your clothing, but you must do your salat, you have to do is fard. In that regard, you take this rule, you take this option. So it is less than the size of a 50% in terms of liquid, stain. But if it's solid feces, forgive me for saying, if it's so small, it's a little bit tiny, 3 grams. I don't know how 3 grams is. It is so small that you have no other option. There is a mark that's caused by this particular solid impurity. Then you need to do your salat. If you do not have access to water or new set of clothing, you can never use the excuse and say, oh, I am impure now, I feel very uncomfortable praying. No, you cannot do this. That's from shaitan. You need to do your salat. No excuse. Inshallah, we will come in later chapters in Kitab al-Tahara, in Kitab al-Salat also. There is a concept called Sahibul Uzur, an excused person. Meaning, if you have a chronic bleeding, or you have some issue with your ear, the pus is coming out constantly, you need to use medication or something to clog, or there is a little operation, a procedure done, and it's oozing out, the abscesses are oozing out from your arm, from your leg, and you cannot control, it's constantly coming out. You cannot say, I can't pray because it's najis. No. You need to do, in that regard, if you're sahibul uzur, if you're an excused person, even when you make wudu, and it's all coming out while you're praying, it's dripping actually, you still have to do your salat. But the only condition is that you need to renew your wudu for every time of salat. So within that Dhuhr time, you can do so many of them. But as soon as Asr time comes, you need to renew your wudu, and you need to pray with a fresh the wudu, although the pus or the urine incontinence that you might have constantly leaking out. Islam is a very pragmatic and very practical religion, but there are rules. However, we talk about the clothing. If that amount of solid impurity, najis, ghalidha, falls into a water, falls into a drinkable, clean water, that water cannot be used for purification. You can't make wudu from it. You can use it in the garden, you can use something else, but not to purify yourself. Only pure things can purify you, not impure things. Now, inshallah, we will look at the further points next week. We have already done an hour and 3-4 minutes. Inshallah, we will stop here. And may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put barakah into our learning. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala purify us. Allahumma ja'alna min al-tawwabin wa ja'alna min al-mutatahhirin wa ja'alna min ibadika al-salihin wa ja'alna min alladhina la khawfun alayhim wa la hum yahzanun. Allah, we beg you to include our names amongst those people who purify themselves through tawbah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we also beg Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to purify ourselves spiritually and physically at all times. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be amongst those people who shall never grieve and never go into anguish on the Day of Judgment, because Allah has accepted them. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala allow us to be amongst the salihin, inshallah ta'ala, amongst the righteous, inshallah ta'ala. Our duty is to learn, our duty is to practice. Even if you never use some of this knowledge, seeking knowledge in this regard is also an ibadah. Inshallah, with that intention, we will continue this course of ours, bi-idhnillah ta'ala. Forgive me for all my shortcomings. Inshallah ta'ala, we will do our best to rectify, and let us know if there are certain things that is confusing to you, because my intention is not to make it too academic or too easy, but enough for you to understand. My objective is you. If you are learning and if it's making sense to you, I am happy. If it doesn't make sense to you, this is an empty pursuit, this is a vain pursuit, and it's a useless exercise. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgive us all. وآخر دعوانا إن الحمد لله رب العالمين سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت وحدك لا شريك لك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك لله تعالى الفاتحة. آمين يا رب العالمين. والسلام عليكم.